Hi, my name is Benedict. Today's mix walkthrough is slightly different. It's using some multitracks provided by the microphone company Lewitt. I've done a mix competition with theirs before with St. Agnes Move Like a Ghost. This is a track called Home by AVEC, I think is the pronunciation. If I'm correct, it's French for with. Won't give a lot of preamble here. We'll let you listen to the song, then I will walk through how I mixed it, the decisions I made, and more importantly, why I made the decisions that I did.
Is life an endless loop, repeating itself? Oh, I hate the thought of you with somebody else. No, I won't deny that you set my heart on fire, and I wonder why, but it feels like we're not enough this time. Why you feel like home, and I don't wanna let go. With you I'm home, I keep holding on. Oh, you're my home, I won't let go, I won't let go. With you I'm home, I'm home. Life's an endless loop with no second chances. Oh, there's a part of you not ready to change you, but I won't deny that I've got you on my mind. Still, I don't know why, but it feels like we're losing touch. While you feel like home, and I don't wanna let go. With you I'm home, I keep holding on. Oh, you're my home, I won't let go, I won't let go. With you I'm home, I'm home. And I keep holding on, Lord, I keep holding on. Oh, I keep holding on, Lord, I keep holding on. While you feel like home, home, home. Oh, you're my home, home. While you feel like home, and I don't wanna let go. With you I'm home, I keep holding on. Oh, you're my home, I won't let go, I won't let go. With you I'm home, I'm home. And I keep holding on.
Well, there we go. If you know the original, and I'm going to admit I came into this not knowing the original at all, not even thinking that I've heard of these people. If you've heard the original, I went back and listened to it after I had done my mix. Then you'll hear that it's this is a different version. My understanding from the little bit that we're told by Lewitt was that they had the act come into the studio, or they went to them or something, who knows, with the whole corona thing. But they had a more stripped back acoustic-y performance made using their mics. Now you can see they tell us on each of these tracks what mic was used and what have you. I won't pretend to know the Lewitt mics at all. I have heard good things about them, mostly from Glenn Fricker of the amazing swearing and wonderful hair. But if Glenn says they're pretty good mics, I reckon they're pretty good mics. I've worked on a couple of these Lewitt challenges. I've thought that everything sounds very nice and very natural. Again, honesty time. When I first started to listen to this, I thought, oh, I don't know whether this is going to be me. For any of you who follow me already, you'll know that I'm a traditionalist. And AVEC, I think that's her name, her vocal tends to be a little outside of what I would normally be comfortable with. But once the song got going, and I started to get myself into the story and the feel of it, then it hooked me. So let's start to have a look at how all of this comes together. We don't need to look at the mixer because that's not where much happens. Sequencer, let's get that out of the way. Let's mostly look at... Actually, we'll turn that back on. Sorry, I'm used to using two screens, so one screen I always feel a bit Gumby. First thing we're going to do is turn off the mastering. Now, I'm not going to bypass it, but I am going to turn all of these things off. Because if I show you what I've done and have you listen with the mastering on, that gives you a different impression. So if you want to hear the difference that the mastering makes, stay with me. This is not going to be a two-minute tutorial on tips and tricks. This is going to be an actual walkthrough. It took several hours to make this mix in the first place and check it and come back and adjust. So this will be relatively long, but if you're passionate about mixing and learning how to do it better or learning how other people think, this may be of interest to you. So the only thing I've got here is a limiter, just set to brick wall using the soft clip, simply because I don't want to blow up the world. Again, we'll go back and have a look at the mixer. First thing, I put things in the order that they make sense to me. These all came through. You can see they're actually numbered. So there was logic in the files when they came through. Thanks, Lewitt. Helps a lot. Wasn't my logic, but I could see there was logic. So that helped a lot. I wasn't having to go and say, oh, there's a guitar here, there's a guitar here. Oh, there's something called left SM57. Oh, sorry. Left whatever mic over there. Everything was logical and put together. So I put, there are just two drum channels. Initially, slightly confused. Later I understood that they don't necessarily use or play a drum kit in a traditional manner. Good on them. It's almost a little bit more rockabilly, their approach. They seem to use a floor tom instead of a kick. Cool, I like it. So put the two drums together, bust them into a drum bus. Took my melodic instruments, put them together. They were a pair of guitars, so it made sense to turn them into a bus. Piano can sit on its own, and a melodica. Wasn't sure what I was going to make of that, but turned out interesting. Took the vocals, lead vocal, background vocal, and bust them. If you watch other of my tutorials, or the walkthroughs, you'll see I do the same every single time. It's about being organised. Learning to be organised and think organised is going to make a massive difference for you. So, you can now see this set out here. Drums, melodic instruments, vocals. Makes it really easy for me to navigate. If I'm working away on a vocal part at that particular time and I think, oh geez, the piano, I don't have to look for the piano because I know where the piano is. If I'm looking for a guitar, I know where the guitars are because I've chosen to put them there, plus they're in the order I use every time. Let's walk our way through. Alright, let's just, again, having come to terms with dealing with one screen when there should be two. Let's have a look at this vocal. Oh, I better make sure I'm in a place where there actually is. Oh, there we go. Vocal. So we'll set this here and we'll set this to loop. May get repetitive, but it allows us to stay focused.
You feel like home, and I don't wanna let go. With you I'm home, I keep holding on. Oh, you're my home.
So that's the vocal as I got it. She is an unusual singer, as I said. We'll turn that off for now. Actually, we'll turn all of these off for now, and we'll come back and reassign them as we go. It's possible the mix won't end up sounding exactly the same, but it's the thinking that I'm showing you, not how to recreate a mix, how to create a mix. Big difference. Actually, that was the other thing I was going to show you. Let's go back to the beginning of her vocals, which is here.
Is life an endless loop, repeating itself? I hate the thought of you with somebody else. No, I won't deny that you set my heart on fire.
I have not found it easy to understand what she's singing there. Fair enough. That's in some ways that's for me to judge, in some ways it's not. Once the song gets going, the message is really clear. At that point, I've got it now, but for a long time I couldn't get it. My concern there was, how do I tell a story I can't understand? But as I say, it picked up, and now I understand it. She swallows her words. I know that's a very modern, fashionable thing, and normally I'm... But this is what I got to work with, and once I've got my head around it, I actually really like what we got. But I've got to deal with that. I've got to accept that. So first thing I did is I put a de-esser on it. It's one of the few things that I'll do without thinking about it. Put a de-esser on it. Personally, I'm as happy not to put a de-esser on something. But I know that people get really bent out of shape when they hear that kind of stuff. So it's probably better to put a de-esser on it. One of the few times I give in to fashion. The Nazis who say what must and mustn't be done. This is a bit of a no-brainer. Salig's leveler. What this device does is complex, but it's a kind of a compressor that doesn't compress. It manages levels for you. So where you've got an uneven vocal, which is relatively common and very much the case here, it helps just level out the difference between high and low. And you might go, but Benedict, that's just a compressor. It's like, no, it works differently from a compressor. This is actually turning up, but not messing around with the tops. So you can get a more solid, even vocal sound without chopping bits off, because the compressor's all about chopping bits off. So this is a nice way to get a nice natural sounding vocal, because it's everything as it was, but it just minimizes the difference.
And I wonder why, but it feels like we're not enough this time. Why you feel like home, and I don't wanna let go. Enough this time.
So she's gone from being wavery, as in like coming in and out, volume that's going below what's useful in many ways. I could have overdone it. Let's pick the wavery section.
We're not enough this time. Why you feel like
I'm not throwing up, but it's the feeling that we do when we overdo it is that the quiet bits become too loud, so it pumps like a bastard. We don't want to do that. That's really bad. There is a mix way, an option to choose how we mix things. So if I really was worried, I could go very hard and then use a small mix amount. But generally, 6 to 12 dB is more than enough, and that just transitions and gives us
this time, while you feel like
quite natural evening out, and therefore a sense of thickening what we're doing there. Then this fella, reasonably new for me. I like these guys. They're a dynamics processor that's both upward and downward compressing. So positive and negative compressing, expansion and compressing, call it what you will.
And I don't wanna let go.
So listen to the ends of her words there.
And I don't wanna let go.
Hear how that sort of drops away because she swallows her voice and doesn't continue to give her voice enough breath. Don't care whether you think I'm being judgmental, but from a mixing perspective, if you listen to this, if we want to keep that last word present in the mix,
And I don't wanna let go.
It disappears.
And I don't wanna let go.
See? I don't want to let go. So the end of the word stays in the mix. So what I've done there is, just like you might have a 2-to-1 ratio on a compressor, as in it goes above the threshold, for every 2 dB that come in, 1 dB goes out, this works backwards. So in this instance, it's saying, once we get below this threshold, for every 2 dB of fall, we'll allow 1 dB of fall. So it's keeping her level higher when she's running out of breath. So it's given us a much nicer, more even vocal overall.
It feels like we're not enough this time.
Because a lot of her character is actually in those things that she does wrong. Those times where she's running out of breath, where she's swallowing her words, all those things that opera school would have her whacked out of there. That's part of what makes her interesting. Plus, I know that modern audiences like that kind of thing. So we want to make the most of that because it's part of what makes her an interesting singer. So we want to do it subtly. I experimented to see what would happen, if we ended up with a 30-to-1, but it's not kind. It's not meant to be kind. We want this to still feel quite natural and like it's organic. So subtle movement. On the compression side, you'll see I've got virtually nothing. 1.1 to 1. So it's basically a 1-to-1. We'll explain that in a mo. So that's given me my basic sound there. If I grab my mixer, now we've got to look at her.
And I don't wanna let go.
You'll see here, in the vocals, there is no delay, there's no reverb. There's processing, no effect at all in this case. Often I might put in some chorusing, some delays, reverbs and what have you. In this case I decided no, I'm going to keep this as natural as possible. Because it's about, you feel like home. I feel like I'm lost, but you feel like home. That's the message in this song. That's incredibly personal. I wanted to keep that personal. When I went off and had a listen to the official video version, bigger production and what have you, really nicely done. I liked it. But there's an intimacy in here that we can use. Rather than being arrogant and saying, oh, but I've got to turn this into hyperpop because that's how things are. No, that's wrong. I'm hearing what I'm hearing and I'm making the most of what I'm hearing. Yes, it's a more subtle mix, but it's an acoustic performance. It's about subtle. So for me to run roughshod over that, probably not the best plan. So, in terms of the whole reverb for the whole track is this echo unit. Nothing but this. There's no actual reverb in here at all. There's a little bit of send. You'll see that the send for the lead is about -18. For the backing, it's -12. So I've gone pretty easy on what I've done here. In part, you want to, because when you listen to this, if you're listening on speakers, unless you've got your head right in them and it's super loud, you'll just hear a kind of a reverb. If you're in cans or something where you've got super sensitivity, you'll hear actual echoes. I just dial these by hand. I pretty well refuse to use BPM sync in delays. I get there's rules and people do it, but it's part of why everything ends up sounding very formulaic. Rather than, giving in to the default 3/16 delay on every single time I add a delay, I'm going to put it where it feels right. And that's probably not going to be 3/16. It's probably not going to be any number of sixteenths. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. Polyrhythmic, because that's natural. So I went with that until it felt right. A little bit of feedback, a little bit of filtering, so just rolling off tops and bottoms. We don't want the whole thing bouncing back at us. We just want to band pass the middle. No drives or anything on that. We're not trying to get funky here. A little bit of wobble, which is just a kind of a random LFO applied in mono, and then a stereo LFO to modulate. And a little bit of diffusion. Diffusion is just basically moving those echoes around so they behave a little bit more reverby. It just softens them up. That's it. That's shared across the whole piece. Every bit of reverb you hear is that. And it was a deliberate choice because I've been accused of being too reverby. And really my answer to that is screw you, make your own mix. Get your head out of mine, because if you can't do mixes or can't show mixes, because I'm always showing mixes, then what the hell have you got your head in mine for? Nasty, I know, but how dare you come and criticise when you've got nothing to show? And the other one is like, if it's my mix, I can do what I want. But it was a little bit of the two. I wanted this, as I said before, to feel very natural, very, very open. And reverb units, they are about being artificial. So it's a kind of reverb, kind of like a pre, what do they call, early reflections, more than anything. So we've got our main vocal sound. Oh, you want to see what I did? You cue. I've taken a tiny bit out here. It wasn't the first thing I did, but going through I discovered, she can be just a little thick at that point. And what we really want to hear from her, at least in this performance, is a kind of a brightness and a kind of an intimacy. And an intimacy tends not to live here on the frequency spectrum. It tends to live here on the frequency spectrum. So back to that just a tiny bit. It's only a couple of dB, but I have pushed her relatively hard on the bright end of things because we want that clarity, that detail, that hyper-real thing is part of what this act's about. So it works very nicely to do that, and plus it brings her right forward, and it's like, ooh, right up into the camera, because that's what we're looking for. So quite simple there. Background vocals. Again, we'll turn off everything, so we start with what we've got. That's fine.
With you, I'm whole. I'm whole. Oh, you're my whole. I won't let go. I won't.
She's singing in a falsetto a lot of the times, which always sounds a bit funny, but it's a slightly more natural or normal kind of vocal production. Again with the de-esser and again with the leveler. So it's
with you, I'm whole. I'm whole.
This girl's a lot more even with her levels. She doesn't swallow her words anywhere near as much, so this isn't as noticeable. And then the dynamics processor. Turn it off.
Oh, you're my whole. I won't let go. I won't let go.
She does chop some of her words, probably borrowing that from A, the fashion of the time, and B, the person that she's backing. Again, pretty light compression I've gone, or very light compression I've gone a smidge hard to hear because being a backing vocalist, she should not overawe the lead vocalist. Doesn't matter who your lead vocalist, they've got to stay front and center. If it's an acknowledged backing singer, let's say I, who am a pretty darn rotten singer, am singing a song and I'm doing the lead, and I have Katie Lang come and do backing vocals. At that point, Katie Lang possibly can be allowed to overawe my singing, because it's going to be Benedict duetting with Katie Lang, or Benedict with Katie Lang. But if it's just, here's Benedict, and on the inner record sleeve it says Katie Lang provided backing vocals on that song, then we probably shouldn't be mixing Katie's vocals to sound significantly better than mine. It's not about making Katie sound like crap. It's just about keeping focus. So a little bit more compression. We've got to make sure that the backing vocals stay behind, because they're not here to overdo or to swamp the lead vocal. But you'll see here I've used backwards compression, so rather than holding her voice open for longer, there's a little bit more noise in the background on this one. I've used it just to shut down faster.
I won't let go, I won't let go. With you I'm whole.
So we just didn't need that tiny bit of extra stuff. It's not a lot. I can do a 1 to 2 or 1 to 4, which is great. It acts like a noise gate. Just wanted to get rid of some little bits and pieces here. There's also somewhere in here a plosive, like she the mic. Happens. I got to deal with that, which actually will bring me to how I've generally dealt with a lot of things. Now, some of you who are mix will be all like, "Oh, but Benedict, you haven't time-aligned everything." And I say to you, go do your own mix. I'll happily listen to it, but go do your own mix. This was an acoustic session. This was, as far as I'm concerned, designed to sound natural. So to go through and gate, you'll see that I've kept everything alive. So all my tracks are alive all the time. There are no noise gates running in here. I'm assuming that adequate noise gating was done by the recording engineer. It sounds good, the recordings sound good, so whoever played recording engineer on these or processed them already did a great job. It is not my job as a mixer to necessarily start rearranging things. So if a singer is ever so slightly out of time, which, let's get all bent out of shape here. Oh no, lead singer, she's come in early. Shoot the bat. No. Because this is the performance. So I'm not going to go in there and move it. Oh my God, the backing singer was late. Was her sandwich running late at Subway? How dare she? There'd be people who go in here and they'd move all of that. Oh, it's got to be... No, your mix, not my mix. I'm looking for natural. I'm looking for comfortable. So I know I've gone in some mixed competitions where I have been thrown out pretty quickly from the running the shortlisting because I've not done things like chopped out noises in the drum kit. Isn't the drum kit about making noises? If you've recorded noises and the recording engineer has put those noises down and there isn't a specific instruction, hey, we realised after the fact that the something was causing noise, I don't want to be too specific here, then this is what I've been given to mix. If they've asked me or told me there's a problem, yeah, I'll look at it. But if I listen to it and I don't perceive there to be a problem, or I even hear those noises and go, that's all part of this performance. Go listen to a Led Zeppelin record and see how much noise there is in that. Listen to a Kraftwerk record, hear how much noise there is in that. You can hear noise gates opening and closing around a sound. Does it make the Man Machine a bad record? No, it makes a Man Machine a wonderful record. It's all part of the charm. So, no, there is no editing where there is a plosive, and I can't remember exactly where it is in the backing singer. She did blow her mic. I thought about it, and I thought, am I improving this performance if I go in here and start cutting bits out? And my answer is no. Because with her and her vocal, that's not her, that's her. I've added the high-pass filter, which I do on most things. You see, I go a little higher with her, because wherever that plosive is, maybe it's here. Let go, I won't let go. With you, I'm home. I can't remember where it is. I won't let go. I won't let go. With you, I'm home. Doesn't matter where it is, because unless you really heard it in the final mix at the beginning of this, it's not an issue. Steve Miller Band, big old jet airliner, the beginning of the song, before he sings his first word. Does that make it bad? No, it actually adds to that performance, because we hear him sucking in this breath, which actually adds to the excitement when that first word hits. It's like, oh, he's really getting himself ready for this. Modern thinking would be like, must fix that, terrible. My thinking is, let's look at the performance. Let's make this as natural as possible. And if somebody is moving around time, moving around tune, making little mic noises or human noises, if it doesn't detract from the performance, not a problem. Yes, there was a plosive in here somewhere, which I can't find, but between the negative compression, which was there, between that and this, it's not there. I can't even find it anymore. It is there somewhere, but it's not an issue. I gave her a little bit of boost here. No treble boost, because remember, I don't want her in front of the lead singer. She's here to provide backing, not to provide fronting. Boost right there in the, well, it's 1.1.5, it's right there in the mids, the bits that people would often cut away. But that's because I want her to be there in the middle of the mix. Not in the front of the mix, but in the middle of the mix. So that gives her a little bit more body in the middle of the mix. So if we take those two, we put them together. Oh, I better, before I do that, better remember to give her her reverb. So her reverb. I'm home, I keep all your my home. I won't let go. I won't let go. Now, if that were the lead vocal, that's just too much. But because she's the backing, again, we want to say to people, she's back a little bit. So she's got more. With you, I'm oh, you're my home. I won't let go. I won't let go. If they both have the same amount of reverb, I won't let go. I won't let go. It may flatter the backing singer, but it pulls them up and it makes them the same. So that's not wise mixing. So here, with you, I'm home. That's what we should be doing. People worry about, oh, what plugin should I use, this, that, and the other. No, it's this plugin that we use to understand how we do that. So that's mostly my vocals done, except for this fella. So. You feel like home, and I don't wanna let go. Now they're nice. At every point, I do not add a processor until I feel like I've got it as nice as I can. It's really important. There are a lot of people who come in and go, well, a vocal must have a compressor, so you've got to put the compressor in and blah, blah, blah. They've done stuff without knowing why they're doing it. They're following a formula, not following the material. So following the material, it's I've got these vocals as nice as I can, what you've been hearing. Now I will turn on a compressor because I feel like, yeah, I want to glue them together. We've got them together.
With you, I'm whole.
But I believed I could probably embiggen them a little bit more with a compressinator. So I've used this fella. In the VS2 world, you'd know it as Molot. He refined his code. Thank you, because apparently Molot is a real pig with a CPU. Refined his code and sold it as a rack extension. It was a relatively early rack extension, and it's a bit of an obtuse one at times, but it's a nice compressor. You can do things like multiplying the attack time by 10. So where it says 40 milliseconds or 400, it's now 430 milliseconds, so you can really slow it down. I played around with the demo of the Magic Death Eye compressor. That's the official name of it. And one of the things I liked was how slow it is. And that had me play around a lot more with the slow settings on this, because initially, ages ago, I thought, but a compressor has to be fast. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Often that's the worst way to use a compressor. So the idea here was to run this really quite slow. By being slow, it lets the transients, the beginnings of their words and phrases come through, and then kind of glues the rest together. So it gives a little bit more of this to it. So it actually, as I said, embiggens the performance. We've got a light ratio and not a lot of squishination.
You feel like home, and I don't wanna let go. With you, I'm whole.
I've given most of what we lose back in my makeup. Now at this point, I've got this balance here and a rough sensor balance here. So the makeup that I've done here, I want to keep what I've got here. So I will do a certain amount of my mixing here inside the track or the channel. No point changing what I don't need to. So
holding on. Oh, you're my holding on. Lord, I keep holding on while you feel like home.
Now see how lead singer doesn't have a huge impact on this.
You're my feel like home.
There's a couple more dB of action when the two girls are together, and that's deliberate. We want to smush them together. Now, because our lead singer is louder, it means that we're actually using this to do a dB or so of ducking. And now that really pulls them together. This is how sound behaves in the real world, in our minds. So we've duplicated some of that. Little bit of ducking. It just means that the lead singer stays on top of our backing singer. Vocals done. That's it. That's all I did to them. When I checked my mix, I came back and I adjusted the backing singer up by a dB, vocals overall up by a dB. That's it. The next thing that I did was the piano. Where's my piano? There's my piano. Now this, some people may think I was heavy-handed with. It goes through a relatively destructive device, which is our screen, a filter, now if this was primarily a piano piece, I wouldn't do this to this. But it's not meant to be the lead of this piece. It's backing. What's the feel of this piece? It's a little bit haunted, especially at the beginning. At the beginning we don't fully really it's hard to understand her words, but there's a sense of I'm lost, I'm alone. So this wonderful sounding, perfect sounding piano, it's not as interesting as at least I would want it to be at that point.
With you, I'm home.
So I'm going to keep that vocal on because most of this work was done whilst the vocal was there. There's no point perfecting a piano sound, putting it back in the mix and going, because that was part of what was happening. It was like, oh, I can make this piano sound lovely, but it's not a piano piece. You know, it's not Chopin. So I actually started with this. I put this thing in.
Life's an endless loop with no second chances. Oh, there's...
Well, just listen to this so you can hear the change that occurs. Now, I don't know all the details, but apparently the scream actually changes phase. I believe I can hear that. You hear a sort of tonal change. There's a tiny bit of drive happening here. It is a tape thing. There's not a huge amount of treble here, and besides I had other plans, but there's also a little bit of tape-style compression here. I wasn't really chasing the compression, but it does it, and it does it very nicely. And I really liked how this sounded, particularly how it ended up. Let me close these up.
Losing touch while you feel like home, and I don't wanna let go. With you, I'm home. I keep holding on.
To me, the original piano recording and the vocals don't sound right together. Now, I don't know whether that is because they're somehow out of phase with each other, but it just sounds right. Somehow they fit together, plus that piano starts to sound a bit distressed or a bit degraded. Not in a bad way. The last thing I want to do is bit crush this or be unkind to it, because it's supposed to be natural, it needs to be beautiful. But a piano is a very versatile instrument. We can use it for a lot of different fields. We can use a really tight, rigid Chopin at some concert that people paid $3,000 a ticket for, so they can prove how good they are to charity, blah blah blah, and their white bow tie. That's a piano. But a piano is also the complete opposite end. They made a whole film called The Piano. And it can be a very intimate, very haunted instrument. And that's what I felt at the beginning of this, and wanted to do that here. She's very sensitive here. The piano needs to be sensitive. But it's a bit warm.
I keep holding on. Oh, you're my home. I won't let go. I won't.
But I didn't want to put too much treble in here. But the EQ in this, don't quite know what it does, but it seems to behave a bit more like an old-fashioned bit of gear or a guitar cabinet's EQ. It's different. I liked it. So a little bit of boost there, and it just helped these things to come together. Then I went and got rid of a lot of it. So what I was really doing there was tilting the tone. You can get tilt EQs, which just kind of do this with your overall tone. Effectively, that's what I was doing here. Then I've added this guy. difference is relatively subtle. I've added drive. You'll see that this is driving. It's distorting, actually. But not enough to be a problem, and I'm rolling off fairly early in the piece. So there's no sparkle up here. It's gone. I'm looking for a really warm piano sound here. For some reason, Sweeper's prone to making things louder, probably because we're adding drive here. So found the point at which I can roll off. There are a couple of modes in here as in dual mono, as in what people call true stereo. I rarely like using true stereo. It normally sounds weird to me, or the traditional stereo modes. So choices, and then of course my very best friend, the echo.
Life's an endless loop with no second chances.
Put it into 100% wet.
Oh, there's a part of you not ready to change you.
But we barely hear it in the mix. It thickens up. It's using a little bit of LFO that's running really fast. So this is up in the fluttering territory, but there's a little bit of movement there. There's no wobble, but there's kind of like spring.
But I won't deny that I've got you on my mind.
Not trying to be lo-fi or any kind of thing like that, but more like bathroomy. A reverb that you get inside your own home is normally low quality. So that gives us just a tiny bit of the sense of this is intimate, this is at home, which happens to be the name of the song.
And I don't wanna let go.
It just adds a little bit more body to that piano without adding what we might call sparkle. So once I've got those two behaving,
With you I'm home. I keep holding on.
and again my thinking is always, could we print this off and send it to the shop like this? Could this go on radio like this? Yes, it could. That's my aim, to always be saying, okay, I'm building this to the point where this could work on its own. So then when we add the extra parts, they're there playing their supporting roles rather than being the whole show. Which is to me the danger of saying, oh, well, it's got drums, I must start with the drums. Again, each person will mix as they see fit, but I'm explaining why I make the decisions I do, and maybe you'll learn something from it. Maybe you can try doing something different next time. May not work for you first time if your thinking's always to do it another way. So, voice, piano, done. What's going to be next? Well, that's going to be, most likely, them guitars. So, again, they need to work with what we're doing. We'll turn these things off for the moment. Guitars are going to be down here. Now, the way these are presented is that there was really one guitar line and then there was an overdub. We don't get instructions with this to say, well, the overdub was done for this reason or whatever. I just have to listen to it and go, okay, that's what I think I'm hearing. That's the story that it's telling me. And that's actually a really good thing. There are times where, bless their little hearts, some clients will come along and they'll give you very explicit instructions for every single moment. Like they want to stage manage the whole thing. And I always think, why are you not mixing this yourself? If you know all this, you should be mixing this yourself. Because you're kind of not taking advantage of the reason why you hire a mix engineer, which is for them to translate the story. Right, wrong, but if you're wanting a creative mix, the best way is to let the person mix what they hear. Because if what you've presented tells a different story, it's better to know it now than after you put it out. Because I'm that kind of mix engineer who will actually say, hey, this is a story I think you're telling me. That's what I hear. Certain kind of clients don't like that, but certain kind of clients do. I prefer obviously working with the latter, You've got to understand who and what you are if you're looking at this as a potential client. I believe that my job is to tell the story I hear, so as I've written somewhere on my site, if I'm hearing a country record and you're trying to get me to mix it like a rap record, we've probably got a problem, because when it goes out there, most of the audience is probably going to hear a country song. Could be cool. We can work with that. We should work with that. Or we can pretend it's not happening, which will probably bite us in the backside later. So, guitars. Don't know why there are two versions, but there are, and it's good. Pretty straight. And that's fine. This is a supporting instrument. It plays it pretty straight. So with a guitar, you'll see that I've done no processing of any particular importance on either of these guitar tracks. Nothing. It's not death metal, I don't need to put them through cabs. I've just EQ'd them. Now the EQing, we should be listening to just the one track now, yes. These are not great for this, but there's a fair amount of boxiness. That's the nature of acoustic guitars. They can be quite boxy and in this area. It's not a bass. So first thing I've done is I've lightened it up a little bit by just getting rid of some of that stuff that there's no win in it. Yes, it can sound very thick and big and full, and I've heard so many times where you go to a cafe and some guitar strummer strumming their guitar and they've got it mixed, like they're like, oh, but I'm the only person here, I need to make it sound. And they've turned up the bass on their guitar and it's just sounds like somebody's sub from a suburb over. Nobody's winning. Acoustic guitars are actually about clarity in a mix. They bring clarity, they bring naturalness, they should not bring mud. One possible exception being Springsteen's Nebraska record. But even there they bring clarity, if not some mud. And then my EQ. I've rolled off some more of this body, because I've got a piano in here. Initially I hadn't rolled that off when I had it in solo, just understanding what I got. I didn't roll that off because obviously as I'm thinking, okay, that's nice and thick. But once we put that with the piano, the piano, I did end up coming back and boosting the bass a little bit, because after I finished the mix I thought, there's no bass in this. There's no boom, 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 boom. There's no bass player in this. Now it sounds very natural and I actually quite like that there isn't a bass player in this, which is why I didn't think about it. The bass is full already, but I just gave the piano's bass a little bit more presence at that point, and I'd already pulled this back because this and the piano, they fight with each other, and that's not what we should be doing. So piano, hear how that sort of, they don't mesh. It sounds too much like, oh, there's a pianist and oh, there's a guitarist, and they're doing stuff together. That's not great mixing. We're looking for one song to rule them all, not 27 different songs happening all at once. So I'm boosting my body here in the 400s and some treble to give us that nice strummy sort of sound. The detail, the brightness, the lightness that an acoustic guitar is generally all about, and is in this situation because it's strumming. You don't picking a melody or playing a dart roll. It's And that's nice. The two now fit together. They work as a unit rather than being two separate instruments. Oop, slight pause on my camera there. The next thing that, of course, got to remember to turn my effects send on. Hear how that actually brightens that guitar up. It gives it a nicer shine as well as the space. In terms of panning, I should discuss that, which I haven't. My lead vocal, I've kept and actually narrowed down a little bit. I don't know how much. Well, there was no stereo actually in it. The processing I've done's added no stereo, but I've just made sure that stays relatively mono and allowed the backing vocals to spread. The width there is probably irrelevant because there's no stereo there, but I felt like I wanted to do it, so I did it. But I didn't want to pan them. Didn't make any sense. It was just one of each. I know people would say, oh, but you should have copied the backing vocal and duplicated it. Again, natural. If they wanted me to have several backing vocalists, they'd have given me tracks. Now, either this band is just super lazy and they expect me to do their job for them, but they didn't give me notes saying, hey, look, we've given you one backing vocal, but we really want 358. Meaning I either have to go out and hire 357 singers, or they want me to do it electronically because they're paying me $5 for this whole thing. No, my brief was, be creative, do what you feel is right. It's natural if I go and duplicate that and electronically mess with it, harness it or chorus it or whatever, which I've done in other mixes. Go watch them. It's not going to feel as natural as it does. So no panning, all very simple here. The guitars, yes, I did pan them. It's not Judas Priest, so we don't need to Tipton and Downing them, make them stand on the other side of the stage. It wants to feel natural, it wants to feel centered. Let the space come from what moves outwards, which is our room, our reverb. So moved it across a little bit. Now you're probably not going to be thinking, oh, it sounds over there. No, it's not meant to sound over there. It's just meant to be there. Next, guitar. Not that one there. Same thing, no particular processing. It's played in a way that it's more picking, so it's not doing the strummy as much. It does do it. I don't want it to seem as dominant as the main strummed guitar, so pulled back just a tiny bit here in the mids. There was a little bit of, I perceived some boominess at times. That was largely with how the pair of these went together. Nice fret slide. Love those sorts of noises. That says here I've got somebody really playing this as opposed to somebody going. It makes it human. So this becomes fairly bright, which is nice. We've got that mix up here. Oh, well. Again, we put it into space. Now you can hear them doing this. They're nicely played. When there's just the one, you don't really hear it over on the side because its echoes end up having space. So the direct signal here kind of squashes. It masks the echoes here, but these echoes are not as masked because there isn't as much direct signal over here. So you actually end up hearing a slightly better balance, especially when there isn't the other guitar happening here. So it actually sounds like there's more guitars. Not that I'm trying to thicken it up, but it creates more movement here. And then when the two of them work together, really nice. So if we again, I could release that. I'm happy enough with that yes, that could go into the stores. That sounds great. So we move on. What's next? Melodica. Slightly unusual instrument, but hey, it's there. I will be honest, I was a little bit like, what are we going to do with this? It seemed like a little bit of a smarty pants decision to play melodica. But it's there. I will hold judgment until I work out what to do with it. The melodica, I'll solo it and turn off its processing. This one I did get creative with, because a melodica on its own is not the nicest instrument. Oh, sorry, I better go back to guitars. I have forgotten to tell you what I did with the guitars. The major processing done on the guitars after the EQs and pannings was this. Put them through a pulverizer. It's a bit of a heavy-handed device. It's meant to be that way. I can't always get good usage of this, but sometimes it really shines. In this case, my gut just said this is going to shine. Tiny bit of squash, so that's compression. The compression on this can be very aggressive. Tiny bit does plenty on this. It's got some sort of built-in saturation, and then you can enhance that by adding more dirt, and it can get really nasty. Just there's a low-pass 24 dB filter, which actually brightens up when you raise the peak or resonance, like most other filters do, but it's got a sound of its own. It's not the same as every other filter in the Reason box. Weird thing is it tends to output super loud, but we've added two things. Little bit of compression and togetherness to bring these guitars into the one space. We don't want two guitars playing separately like they hate each other. We want to bring them into the one box. This does that. And because it's doing a little bit of that saturation-y thing, it brightens them up in the mix. Melodica. As I said, slightly strange instrument. What is it? How do I treat this? Is it a squeeze box? What I always wanted from the very first time I started hearing this, before I downloaded it, and what I would have loved to have done, but this is a hole in my personal musical skills, is that I downloaded this track hoping there was MIDI. I really was hoping that they'd given us MIDI. Even at least the piano chords or something, so that I could have tried to work out what key it's in, what scale it's in, what tempo it's in, all of those kinds of things that a better musician than I would know. Because I actually wanted to add a string line in here. I feel like this mix is just dying for a string line. Didn't happen. So I guess there was deep down psychologically a desire to use this as a little bit of a string line. I don't know, but it just called to me to be less than this. It just...
And I don't wanna let go.
It feels like the kazoo solo that's stuck on. It just doesn't sit for me. So I got a little creative with it. First thing is, let's see what we can do with this. Tightened it up a little bit. Again, pretty mild settings, just enough to close it. So we're really focusing on the sound. Even it out a little bit. Because we were going to put this through overdrive. This is a softish overdrive. It can get pretty aggressive, but it's primarily, or I primarily use it as a soft overdrive, not as a full-on thing. So it takes away some of the nasally, just sort of thickens it up a little bit. Haven't done anything with these other sections. They didn't seem right. Now this was, to a certain extent, luck. But when you're mixing, there's a fine line between what your brain already knows but you're not aware of and blind luck. This was one of those. I thought, we need to thicken this sound. It just... It doesn't fit with any of the other sounds in the mix quite right. I don't love the idea of turning one sound into another sound, but if I can't feel like they fit, I've left with the choice of throw this sound away or find a way to make it useful. I would rather put some time and effort into finding a way to make it useful than throw it away, but throw it away I will. If necessary. I would rather release a song that sounds great without somebody's part that was doing more damage than good than to, oh, but they were on the record, they have to be on the record, and put it in and actually scupper the chances of the song sounding great, or at least what I believe is great. Started with the chorus and it's like, yeah, not really helping, is it? The ensemble effect, sort of, but it just doesn't fit right. But this thing's got a couple of other modes. Sometimes grain works really well. It can make a very natural chorus or unisoning type thing. And then there's this one, which is a fast Fourier transform, which is math stuff. But occasionally it does something wonderful. And right here, I hit that and it's like, this is kind of wonderful. It can be overdone, but now it sounds like a sound that might want to belong in this mix. And last, but never least, is my friend the Echo Bode. This is not a pitch shifter, but a frequency shifter. So it can actually operate, and I mostly use it to sound like a ring modulator. It makes a mutant ring modulator. But the biggest use I have for this is of changing the spectral tone. Often I use this on sample or synth snares and things like that because it moves the tone around. Because you're not shifting the pitch, you're shifting all the frequencies. And therefore, we're doing this. You can do that with a synth, let's say Thor, which doesn't have any kind of analogizing drift thing. You can put a slow wander on this, and it'll sound like you've got different pitchings and different filterings. The voicing moves around, not in a simplistic, oh, I've got my sampler and round-robined it by pitch shifting it. That never sounds right. Whereas this kind of sounds natural. You've got to be subtle, but it sounds natural. So I've added a delay. And of course, we also have to add in our echo, our reverb, our room, which I've gone quite heavy on. Hear how that now really spreads out. It's spread out because of the quartet, the FFT, that's fully wide. This one I didn't do any stereoism with, but once it hits that shared reverb, it really creates really nice. Excuse me whilst I whack my microphone. Let's see if we can get this right again. There we go. We get this really nice broad backdrop. So EQ wise, once I've got it in the mix, I've got a lot happening. Sorry, I was going to use my hands. I've got a lot happening up here. I've got most of my clarity here, so there is a bit of a hole here. So I've moved this to be a bit fuller here, because the nature of the melodica sound is that it is kind of kazooey. It's a bit. I've softened it up. I've removed a fair amount of the treble, but not enough to make it die, but boost it here in the middle of the mids. Now what happens is once it comes into the mix, it's provided at this point this really nice big expanse. So it suits the story of the song really well at this time. And you know what? The average music listener who were listening to this, they'd probably go, oh yeah, that's a rock organ, it's a B3. I didn't mean to turn it into a B3, but it's ended up playing the role of a B3. But it sounds like an interesting B3. The pulsing in the playing of it, which on its own, honestly, I found uncomfortable.
Oh, I keep holding on. Lord, I keep holding on.
With the processing, the effects and stuff actually sounds like a Leslie. It doesn't have the stereo Doppler thing of a Leslie, but it's got a lot of the feel of a Leslie, of a circular speaker cabinet, or a rotating speaker cabinet. So it's actually stepped into the role of the B3, the rock organ, or a pump organ, and it sits beautifully in the mix. It makes it actually sound a lot more traditional than it was meant to be. So personally, that's one of those sounds that I thought might have to go in the bin, but I was pleased because I rescued it. What the melodica player will think of that, I don't know. But if I were hearing this mix on a record, I'd go, yeah, that's nice. That sits in the background really, really nicely. It just adds that extra little something, and that's what it was meant to do. The melodica was meant to add an extra little bit of something at this point. Winning. So all we had left, and you've started to hear them. Sorry, at this point I had.
Oh, I keep holding on. Oh, you're my.
And again, I would have gone to press with that. Very happy with it. But we've got a couple of drums, and they serve a purpose. So our first drum is this one, floor tom. I'm looking at it and I'm going, well, why have you, if you've got a drum kit in here, why have you only sent me a floor tom and an overhead? But as I said, by looking at videos, I see that the guy actually plays his floor tom as the kick drum and then just has a snare. So miking is most likely floor tom, overhead to catch the snare. Nice. That's not unusual in rockabilly, where they might play a floor tom, or maybe not even have a kick drum at all, largely because they've got a double bass, which is It's far better than any kick drum that they had at that time, seeing they were commonly using little jazz kicks. Where do we go? Let's find this here. Now I can't really hear that so clearly here, probably because I've got that on. That's why. That's better. And we'll open this up. Get this out of the way. So it's here now, yeah. That's a tom. Now, being a floor tom, toms are designed to resonate longer. And one of the problems with that is that you can lose impact because you've got a lot of as it continues to resonate and whine and what have you. So seeing it's being used as a kick drum rather than those tom things being allowed to ring out, I felt like we probably needed to control it a bit. Let's turn that on. In solo, you'd think, gee, it's a little brutal. I'm using this to negatively compress it, so in other words, to shorten the sound. Nothing in terms of compression here. I just wanted to shorten that sound. Otherwise, once it's in the mix, you end up with all this hanging around in there, and it stops making the sound clear and just makes it too full. So shortened it up, tightened it up. He's playing this like it's a kick drum. It plays the role of a kick drum. Let's have it do that. In terms of EQ, get rid of some of the mush. Nothing useful's happening down there anyway. I have EQ'd this more like it's a kick drum. I've given it a boost at 80. I considered the idea of somewhere else, and it wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but because it plays a role of a kick drum, people are going to expect it to be in a kick drum role. They're not going to be thinking, "Ooh, look, there's a floor tom used as," unless they're watching the video. It didn't really make a lot of sense to do it that way. I have pulled out a huge amount of now that's part of it, but it makes for a really thick sound, but it just up the mix. So we got rid of that. We've got rid of a little bit of treble, just a little bit of treble, because this doesn't need to be playing there. Sometimes a kick drum, you want it to be really bright and clicky, death metal or something, bright clicky kick drum, so that it can cut through the mix. But no, this needs to be low under the mix. Remember, I'm happy with a mix without this altogether. Then the next thing we've got is this, the overheads. You see, I've done no processing on this other than this. It gets a very light sound with regards to, I believe it's rim shots and taps and bits and pieces. I'm not a drummer. It is carrying the kick drum sound, and I wanted to separate that out. Not aggressively, but really just to say, hey, in this sound I'm focusing more on the snare. So I've gotten rid of a little bit of that, and then when it's snarey, which is up here, wanted that snare to feel bright because it doesn't happen until we get into towards the end of the song. But when it comes in, we want that to be, ooh, life is becoming fulfilling, and the snare adds that fulfilling sound. It's not there to sound dark at that point. It is there to sound bright and not quite party time, not quite fair time, but it's to add a lot of brightness to the story at that point. So really pulled that up quite bright. By doing that, it does bring in our hi-hatty thing, which I think is really just tapping. His business what it is. But just brings that through clearly. In terms of overall processing, again with the pulverizer, bit of squash, virtually no dirt, with the filter. That sounds more natural and open, but remember, this is to be under the mix, not in front of the mix. This is not our lead kick drum and our lead snare drum and there happens to be a singer somewhere in the room at that time, but she was wearing a shirt so none of us bothered looking at her. That is not what this mix is about. There is a singer and a voice and her story. That's what the song's about. And then we've got all these other parts that help her tell her story. So being a bit warmer helps say she's out front, because remember we gave her quite a lot of treble boost. We really want her out here. And yes, there are drums and they get exciting, but they're always backing her. If the drummer has an ego problem with that, he can go talk to his manager. And his manager hopefully will say, yes dear, yes dear, yes dear. And it'll go no further. The one thing we haven't covered there with our drumminess is our, well, it's all mono anyway, but is our use of putting it into the reverb. Piano needs to be back in.
Not ready to change you, but I want.
We don't really want a lot of kick drum in our bus reverb. I know it's in the room and in theory we're hearing as much of that, but all we're going to do again is just add a lot of murk, a lot of mess. While you may be thinking, oh, but it makes it sound thick. Yeah, but it makes it sound thick. All it does is give you a resulting track that's not pleasing. You've lost track of the story. You're worrying about thick rather than detail, and detail's what sells a story. Why do people still read Tolkien's Lord of the Ring and Hobbitses and what have you? It's long and turgid, but it's the detail that we love in that. The amount of detail is immense. And then if you're some sick, sad individual like me, you go off and you read the Silmarillion, which is just a whole lot of boring background history about the world. Detail, that's what sells the story. And this I allow to have more reverb stuff on it. Sounds a bit much, but once you bring it into the mix,
With you, I'm home. I keep holding on. Oh, you're my home. I won't let go.
see there, the drums kind of don't really feel connected to that mix very well at all. They're there, but they don't sound like they belong very well. Now that can be a trick, and I use that a lot, particularly because I generally don't do my drums super loud, particularly where I'm using a little kit, like a 606 type kit, which is small analogy kinds of sounds, and I'm not looking for great big 909 thumps or great big long 808 things. I'm just looking for that almost Latin rhythm percussion thing that you can get from early drum machine type sounds, analog drum machines. So I will go very light on the reverb, the bus send, because it helps pull them forward, so I can reduce the whole level of them and just let them sit forward under the mix. Quite different from the whole, make them sound like somebody using Stonehenge to play drums kind of approach. But here, it's natural that we want to make people feel like it's in a room on its own. There seems to be too much reverb. Put it in the mix. That snare goes from feeling flat and papery to now feeling quite expansive and actually sitting behind her, rather than it being like, oh, there's her and a snare drum. We've got her forward and the snare drum behind, whilst making the snare drum bigger. No compression. So that's all my reverb sends. That's all my levels. Little tiny bit of tweaking here just to get things the way I wanted them to, but it's really pretty minor. When I did go and listen in the other room with the home theatre thing, my kick was too loud, so I pulled that back quite a bit. I could, again, as I've said, be happy and pull it back even further, but I know that's where people are going to kind of want it. So we've got a nice sounding mix.
Lord, I keep holding on.
Cool B3. Sorry, melodica player.
Feel like and I don't wanna let go.
That's great. That's a really nice payoff. I've gone through the first couple of minutes of this song. Initially, I'm a bit... But that's actually the intention. So it's working. If it had stayed there, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation now. Second chorus brings in our B3. Bring it on home. It's easy to think, oh, but we're not getting enough of the backing singer. Remember, this isn't the backing singer's song. This is our lead singer's song, but when we drop her out... Doesn't feel like home no more. So in this case, where I've got her, to me, she's become the perfect backing singer, because you're not 100% aware that she's there, but she adds so much body to the main performer and the main performance and the story. Nicely done in my book. There was a count in on the beginning. There was a bar or so of silence and then a... I debated backwards and forwards, does this add or detract from the song? It didn't add, it detracted, so slice me nice, it's gone. No need to see it or hear it, it's history. A little bit of post-roll, doesn't really seem to be anything there. I could have just gone through and chopped it off, but it wasn't noisy, and if there was noise in there, it's running through the whole thing. It's natural. What I did was simply this. There's a really nice hang on the end. Because the backing singer very nicely has shut her gob at that point. See? So that really hangs. It reminds us of the sort of childlike thing at the beginning. And it hangs, so here there isn't a lot of reverb, so I just nice subtle fade. We don't want a really hard sharp fade here, because if there is background noise we don't want it to, because that's, it just fades away and gives us roughly our 5 seconds of post roll from the last bit we hear.
And I keep holding on.
1, 2, 3. Well, it's 3 or 4, but we could expand that a little bit further, but that's it. I'm happy with that as a mix. If I were not the mastering engineer, I'd send it off. What have we got in terms of level? A loud bit.
While you feel like and I don't wanna let go. With you I'm
Peaking at about -8, -9. Mastering engineer will probably want -6. I'm not going to mess with that. That's right where it needs to be. We don't need to worry about extra noise floors because my DAW is not adding noise. Oh, how good that is. All those people who think they want tape, you poor deluded fools. Now, I'll show you what I did to finalise it or master it. Now, I've gone really over easy. I know modern music, there's that tendency to be really loud, but again, I want subtlety. I want this to breathe. So, glue compressor, the famous SSL glue compressor.
I keep holding on.
I know I'm running a little low, so I've added a few dB. I don't add the 8 dB because I don't want to push at this point. I will be taking advantage of some saturation, but I don't want to push. I'm not looking to splat anything. Let it be easy. Just turn my threshold down.
Oh, you're my I won't let
Just in the loudest bits, we're getting 2 to 3 dB of compression. It's slow. 10 milliseconds in. We can go tight.
I won't let go. With you I'm
And in some ways that's tighter, but this isn't a dance track. This wants to feel subtle. It wants to feel easy. You know, if you're listening to James Taylor singing about Mexico, it's not the same thing as if we're listening to Metallica singing, you know, very different. One of those, yes, we're going to limit hard and fast maybe. But this one we want it to really breathe. So 10 millisecond attack lets all those little bright sparkly dynamics come through, and then just where there is a snare hit or everyone gets a bit excitable, so it's very natural ear type compression we're looking to glue, not to control levels. No makeup gain at all. We can do it here, but there is no cost with my using another device that can do it better. So compression done. I like a bright mix. I like a nice clear mix. So I'll add a couple of dB at 8K. If I feel like it's too thick in the middle, I might roll off 1 dB down here somewhere. I did not feel that, so I'll do nothing. I never do what I don't think needs doing.
I keep holding on.
Yep, let's go back
Feel
in.
like and I don't wanna let go. With you I'm
This is almost like a preset with me, but I do the same thing every time. I turn it up to about 0.7 and it feels right. I'm not looking for... Any idiot can do that.
I keep holding on. Oh, you're my
It's easy to think that, oh, but that sounds better because it's louder. But no, it doesn't. You don't want to hear what you're doing here. If you A-B it,
I won't let go. I won't let go. With you
now I'm not listening for levels because unfortunately this isn't level balanced as you switch it in and out. As you turn up the saturation gain, it just gets louder. It's not level balanced. But I'm just listening for presence, and that I know gives me nice presence. If I start going above it, I know once I start listening somewhere else, I'm going to go, oh, yeah. Come on, got carried away. I turn this one on. I always turn this on into mono. If that transition from stereo to mono sounds awful, yeah, the first few times it can feel that way, but you know what? When you've got your mix right, when you go into mono, it will feel natural. Yes, we will quickly check to see. Is my Melodica B3 still there? Because I stereo-ated it quite a lot. It's possible technically it could collapse, but I don't do the kinds of things that are likely to collapse. Stereo widener stuff, I don't do as a general rule. You know, it's just asking for trouble, and there's better ways to do it. So I will check in mono. That's really all I need to do. I'm going to look at my levels here. Now I can't remember where it was at. Let's say for the moment it was at 3. That's it. Now remember, I've had this running. It would have actually been sitting here the whole way. If I was composing or mixing, it sits here, it does this. If I see stuff happening here, I'm turning down the levels. Not uncommon if I'm getting mixes from less experienced studios that I may have to put everything in and turn the level down here. But if I'm mixing into a limiter, massive no-no, especially for this kind of mix. But once I've got to this point, I make it go away. It's not going to print that guy. It can, but it's not, because I got this guy. And I use the tube mode more than anything else, the digital or the tape mode. I don't really know what the difference is in terms of sound, but I like the tube mode. I've got my 0.3 of a dB of headroom, so this can never hit 0. If it's hitting 0, oof, bad news when it comes onto YouTube or whatever. When we go back to stereo, really natural. I think I may have gone to +4. There was a point here that this hit 0, and one time I remember it running through and hitting +1. No more than that. Yes, you can limit as hard as you want, but remember, every time you limit harder, ultimately you're probably making your track quieter. Because using the LUFS measurements, chances are that YouTube is going to go, yeah, look, that's too loud, and turn you down 1 or 2 dB. And you might think, doesn't matter, it's 1 or 2 dB, that's nothing because I'm louder by 8 dB or whatever. No. In reality, when people are listening to your tune up against other tunes, unless everything they're listening to is equally over limited or undynamic, if we were to go from, let's say, James Taylor's Mexico, as long as it wasn't a horrible remix, remaster kind of thing where they have... but if we went from a nice natural recording of James Taylor's Mexico to this, and I decided to run it hot... Feel like that sounds good. The reality is, on a streaming service, James Taylor's Mexico is probably going to sound better than my overly limited track, because the LUFS thing will have gone, whoa, this is like up here, and it's probably turned it down to here. Losing! So not only has James Taylor got more dynamic range, which makes him sound more exciting, but he manages to actually be louder. His loud bits are louder than my messed up track. So go easy. 1 or 2 dB of limiting is probably plenty. If you need to do more, your mix is wrong. Remember, at every point there, I would have been happy to release. I'd have been happy to release when I had just the lead vocal and the backing vocal together. Yep, that sounds brilliant. Print it. So we're looking for lovely the whole way through. My job is to make this seem as lovely as it can. Now, some of you who work in harder things. Oh, but I work in death metal and it's not allowed to sound lovely. It's like, no, you're missing my point. Death metal sounds beautiful in its own way. It has a kind of beauty. So work for that. Work to make it as beautiful as you can within the context of the material. And I believe I have brought out the beauty in this and given us a track that's a joy to listen to.
And I don't wanna let go with you.
Okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm happy with that. I'm delighted with it. I actually am very interested in the act now. So AVEC, they have 3 records, I think, from my research yesterday. 3 albums from 16, 18, and 19 or 20. 2020, that is. And they've had a few singles, and I think their material is actually really quite interesting. And at some stage I hope to sit down and listen to an album to get a sense of, hey, is this a thing that I want to put in my collection? So it's been a big win on that front, to go from being not sure whether this is for me, to, hey, this is quite lovely material, as I understand how she works in particular, and the fact that the musicians really seem to understand that they're there to support her and her stories, which is great. That's what a band should be there for. You know, watch George Strait with his Ace and the Whole Band. They're up there with the E Street Band. The E Street Band don't overplay Bruce. That's why the E Street Band and the Ace and the Whole Band are considered some of the best bands in the business. Doesn't matter what genre you listen to. If you were to pick up a band, like if I were to walk into a venue anywhere and say, oh geez, I need a pickup band, what would be the first things that I would hope to ask for? Oh, give me the Ace and the Whole Band or the E Street Band. They'll do. They'll more than do, because they're going to make me look good. So the band here are making her look good. That's I noticed the same thing on the records as well. That's really good work. That's what a band should do. I'm interested to hear this backing singer, who I think is the pianist as well, in another setting. But here, she's doing a great job. I hope you have found this interesting. If you have specific questions, down below. If you just want to tell me rude things, don't. Go away, do your own thing. If you want my discussion or opinion on the thing you've done compared to the thing I've done, great, delighted to. Post that there, say, here's my thing, I did this, you did that. What do you think about the differences? Happy to discuss. But if you want to dump on me, no, not cool. It means that you're not professional. If you've got questions about, hey, you did that, and mostly people do that, again, delighted to explain why I did it. I'll explain why I believe it's the right thing to do, if I haven't already explained it here, which I probably have because I talk an awful lot. If there's anything you want me to do, I'm delighted to mix something of yours. Absolutely delighted to do it. We can approach it one of 2 ways. One, and my absolute favourite way, is when you come to me and say, Benedict, here's my track. What do you hear in it? Mix it. Creative mix, I get to go do what I do. You've watched this, you've seen me do it. If you want to see more, there are other mix walkthroughs on here. Few different genres, few different styles. One case I even complete the piece. It was an incomplete piece. I complete the piece, mix it, make it ready to go. Love doing that kind of stuff. So there's that option of possibly even being on one of these videos where, again, up front, you do not get sent the mix unless the situation is unusual and I feel like it. Don't ask or expect the mix. You get the mix, you get this video. And a point at which you can send your fans in, send them into, minute 5 or 7 or whatever, and they can sit there and watch your track and enjoy your track. That's the mix. That's cool. You get social proof as well that your material is good, because if I've mixed it, I think there's something good about it. If I think it's poopy, I won't be mixing it. I'll just decline. So there is social proof in my having mixed your thing. And of course, if you're looking for something where you want particular outcomes, I'm delighted to sit there and talk with you about that. I will be very honest. If I don't believe that outcome is achievable, I will tell you, hey, look, I don't think this outcome is achievable. And then we will know where we can go from there. My rates are not excessive. If you are not very well off, genuinely, I'm not particularly interested in people who've got plenty of money to spend on Xboxes but then say they only want to pay me $5. That is supremely uncool. But talk to me about budget. If it's an issue for you, I'm more interested in getting great work done. You have a great day. Enjoy this. I've enjoyed doing this myself.